Welcome to Wild West Love Chronicles. Today, I'm going to share a truly touching and heart-pounding story. So sit back, relax, and let's listen closely together. The morning sun stretched its golden fingers over the Wyoming plains, painting the dry grasses in hues of honey and rust. The air was crisp, tinged with the earthy scent of dew on weathered wood and saddle leather. Clara Mae Dalton stirred the embers in her stove and poured hot coffee into a chipped mug, the handle worn smooth from years of daily use. Outside the window, the ranch lay still, the horizon broken only by the silhouettes of cattle and the white, wind-beaten fence lines stretching toward the mountains. This place had once been full of dreams and the echo of laughter. Now it was just quiet. She pulled on her boots with a familiar sigh, the kind that slipped from her lips without asking permission. It had been 2 years since Lucas died. Or at least that's what the Army had told her. KIA, a clean acronym that didn't account for the wreckage it left behind. They'd sent a flag in a box, and a letter that didn't smell like him, didn't sound like him, didn't tell her how to breathe through the night. Her days had become a rhythm of necessity. Feed the animals, fix what needed fixing, ride the perimeter, and try not to remember. She did it all with the precision of someone who had nothing left to lose, but wouldn't dare stop. That morning was no different until the sky darkened faster than it should have. Clouds gathered like a bruise, and the wind shifted. Clara's eyes narrowed. That was no ordinary change in weather. She knew this land like she knew the lines on Lucas's palm. Something was coming. She saddled up Dusty, her gelding, and rode out to check the eastern fence line, where the cattle liked to wander when the pressure dropped. Dusty's ears twitched as lightning forked across the sky, a silent warning before thunder rolled in its wake. They were 2 miles out when the first raindrop hit her cheek. By the time she reached the creek that ran along the northern edge, the rain was a wall of needles and the wind was screaming like it had something to say. She tugged her hat low and pressed Dusty forward. A tree branch cracked overhead, splashing debris and water onto the trail. And that's when she saw him. At first, she thought it was debris, a log or an old tarp caught in the underbrush. But then it moved. Clara pulled up short, heart pounding. There, tangled among the reeds and mud near the swollen creek, was a man. He was crumpled in an unnatural way, soaked through, his clothes torn and caked in grime. She slid off her horse and knelt cautiously. "Hey!" she shouted over the roar of the rain. "Can you hear me?" No response. She touched his shoulder, and he flinched with a groan. His face was bruised, jaw stubbled and sharp, his dog tags missing. The remnants of a military uniform clung to him like a second skin, ripped and faded but unmistakable. Her breath caught. A soldier. Alive. Barely. He opened his eyes just a sliver. Storm gray, unfocused, rimmed in pain. His lips moved, barely a whisper. "Luke!" Clara froze. The name hit her like a blow to the chest. Her mind reeled, but she steadied herself. It couldn't be. It was just a name. A coincidence. Nothing more. She shook her head and grabbed his arm, trying to get a better grip. "You're gonna be all right, soldier. I've got you." It took everything she had to hoist him onto Dusty's back and ride with one hand, keeping him from falling. The ride home was a blur of mud and thunder, her heart louder than the storm. She didn't know what she was doing, only that she couldn't leave him there to die. The rain washed away more than the dirt. It stirred ghosts she thought had settled. When she got back to the house, she half dragged, half carried him inside. She laid him on the couch, grabbing towels and a blanket. His skin was cold, clammy. The wound on his temple had stopped bleeding, but not by much. Clara fumbled with the old rotary phone on the wall, her fingers trembling as she dialed. "Doc? It's Clara Mae. I found a man. Looks like a soldier. Head injury. Bad." Dr. Harris arrived an hour later, soaked to the bone, squinting through his bifocals as he checked the stranger over. "Concussion for sure," he muttered. "Might have memory loss. If he's lucky, it's temporary. But no ID, no tags? That's odd. Military, you think?" Clara nodded slowly. "Looks like it. Said his name was Luke." That's all he managed before he passed out again. The doctor gave her a look, one that held more questions than he asked. He's stable for now. Keep him warm, hydrated. I'll notify the sheriff, but if you want to keep him here until he wakes up, I don't see harm in that. She nodded again, and he left, leaving her alone with the storm and the mystery she'd brought into her home. Clara watched the man sleep, his face pale against the patchwork quilt. His hands were calloused, familiar in a way that made her chest ache. She shouldn't have felt it, but something about him tugged at her heart like a thread unraveling a worn sweater. She told herself it was the uniform. The way the brain fills in blanks when grief paints every corner of your life. But still, she pulled a chair beside the couch and sat down, arms crossed, eyes fixed on him. Her heartbeat slowed, and the storm outside began to fade into distant murmurs. A log in the hearth cracked, sending a shower of sparks up the chimney. The stranger stirred in his sleep, whispering again. Clara, her name. Spoken so softly it might have been her imagination. But she heard it. She knew she did. She didn't move, didn't speak. Just stared at him, as if willing the truth to reveal itself in his face. And for a terrifying, impossible moment, she thought it already had. It was in the set of his jaw. The way his lashes curled at the ends. The curve of his cheek. But it couldn't be. Lucas was dead. He was buried halfway around the world. This man, this broken, half-conscious man in her guest room, was not her husband. And yet, as the rain eased into a gentle whisper on the tin roof, Clara couldn't shake the feeling that fate had come knocking at her door. Or maybe it had been swept in with the storm, carried on the back of a man with no name but one she knew too well. She stood slowly, watching the rise and fall of his chest. Then she pulled a blanket tighter over him, her hand lingering near his shoulder. "You're safe now, Luke," she whispered, "whoever you are." She walked to the door, paused, and looked back, and in that stillness, something inside her shifted. It was the first time in 2 years her home didn't feel entirely empty. The light poured through the old curtains like liquid gold, brushing over the floorboards and warming the rug where Dusty's muddy hoofprints still lingered from the night before. Clara stood at the sink, hands buried in a pan of warm, soapy water, scrubbing a cast-iron skillet that had seen better days. The silence of the house wrapped around her like an old quilt, comfortable in its familiarity, but worn thin at the edges. Her thoughts wandered, as they often did now, not out to the cattle or the repairs waiting on the west fence line, but to the man sleeping in her guest room. Luke, or whoever he really was. She'd checked on him twice already that morning. He was breathing steady, forehead cooler than it had been the night before, and still out cold. The storm had blown out in the early hours, leaving a thick fog that rolled like smoke over the grassland, making everything feel hushed and suspended. The kind of quiet that made memories creep in where they weren't welcome. Lucas used to whistle when the morning coffee was ready, a low, lazy sound that she missed more than she ever thought she would. Funny how silence could grow heavier than noise. She rinsed the skillet, dried it, and set it on the stove. The clock above the mantel ticked a beat too slow, a little crooked like always. Everything was the same, and yet nothing was. She brought a bowl of broth to the guest room just before noon. The man had stirred once or twice in the night, murmuring nonsense, maybe names, maybe pieces of things long lost. Now he lay with one arm flung across his chest, his face turned toward the window, stubble casting shadows along his jaw. "Morning," she said softly, nudging the door open with her hip. "Or whatever part of the day you want it to be." He blinked, then winced, lifting a hand to his forehead as if trying to press the pain back inside. His eyes found hers, unsteady, like someone learning to stand on new legs. Where am I?" "You're at my ranch, outside Johnson County," Clara said, setting the bowl on the nightstand. "You were out near the creek. I found you after the storm. You remember anything?" His eyes closed, his face tightening. "No, I woke up and everything's blank. Except, my name's Luke, I think." You said it last night, Clara replied, not letting the tremble in her voice show. That's all you gave me. He opened his eyes again, studying her face for something she couldn't define. Recognition, maybe. Or trust. Or fear. Luke, huh? She said, offering a small smile. Well, that's a start. He tried to sit up and grunted from the effort, then gave up, slumping back onto the pillow. Feels like my head got run over by a tank. Wouldn't surprise me if it had. You've got a hell of a bruise. She handed him the broth. Think you can manage this? He took it with shaky hands and nodded. Thanks, ma'am. Clara, she said. Just Clara. He nodded, repeating it under his breath as if trying it on. Clara. The way he said it made her heart hiccup. Same rhythm, same tone, but it couldn't be. It wasn't. She folded her arms and leaned against the doorframe, watching him sip slowly, lips trembling slightly with the heat. Anything else coming back? She asked after a while. Where you're from? Rank? Family? He closed his eyes, searching the darkness behind them. Just flashes, noise, dust. A woman's voice. Music. I don't know what's real. You've had a hell of a shock. Doc says memory might come back in pieces. Or not at all. He nodded, taking another sip. Feels like I should know you. Clara didn't flinch, but she felt it like a slap. Maybe you remind yourself of someone, she said. It's the brain's way of grasping for answers. He looked down, ashamed somehow. I don't mean to be weird. I feel safer when you're in the room. Clara swallowed hard. She couldn't allow herself to believe that meant anything. She'd lost Lucas once. She wasn't about to set herself up to lose him again, even if every inch of her screamed that this man was more than just a coincidence. She let him rest for the afternoon and filled the hours with chores, though her hands were clumsy and her thoughts kept circling back to the way he'd said her name. She patched the south barn door, refilled feed troughs, and hosed off the mud from the front steps. Every now and then she caught herself glancing toward the house, checking if the curtains moved. By dusk, Luke had enough strength to sit up fully and eat something more solid. She made stew, the same way Lucas had liked it. Extra carrots, less onion. He thanked her with a weak smile, and they ate in near silence until he set his spoon down with a sigh. This place, he said, feels like it's always been here. Like I've stood in this kitchen before. Clara's eyes snapped to his. You sure? He shrugged. Not sure about anything. It's like a dream you almost remember. Just on the edge of it. She didn't answer. She couldn't. Instead, she cleared the dishes and set them in the sink. You said I was in uniform, he asked quietly. She nodded. Parts of one. Pants mostly, boots, no tags. He looked down at his hands. Then I was military? Looks that way. Could explain the memory loss. Head injuries are common in combat. He was quiet for a long moment. What if I don't want to remember? She turned toward him. What do you mean? What if I find out I did something terrible? His voice was low, edged with fear. What if the past is worse than not knowing? Clara stepped closer, studying the worry on his face. Then we deal with it. Together. Why would you do that? He asked. I don't leave people behind, she said. And that was the truth. He met her eyes then, and something passed between them. A flicker. Recognition. Maybe even gratitude. Whatever it was, it made the room feel warmer. That night, Clara couldn't sleep. The wind had picked up again, and the windows rattled in their frames. She sat on the porch, wrapped in Lucas's old jacket, rocking slowly, eyes fixed on the stars above the silhouette of the barn. Dusty neighed somewhere in the distance. The land stretched endlessly in every direction, the way it always had. But for the first time in years, it didn't feel empty. The door creaked behind her. She turned to see Luke in the doorway, wrapped in a blanket, leaning on the frame for support. Couldn't sleep, he said, voice hoarse. Storm stirring again, Clara replied. He stepped out carefully, lowering himself into the rocking chair beside her. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the wind rustle through the prairie grass. "Did you love him?" Luke asked softly. She didn't answer at first. The stars above seemed to shimmer harder, the weight of memory pulling at her ribs. "More than anything," she whispered. "He was my whole world." Luke nodded, eyes fixed on the dark horizon. "I hope someone loved me like that." Clara's throat tightened. She wanted to scream at the sky, demand answers, demand truth. But all she could do was look at this man with Lucas's eyes and pray the morning would bring clarity. He turned to her then, slow and careful, his blanket slipping down to reveal a long scar that trailed from his collarbone to his ribs. "I don't know who I am," he said, "but when I'm next to you, I don't feel lost." And with that, he stood and returned inside, leaving Clara alone with the night, her heart thudding with something dangerously close to hope. The wind howled across the plains, but in the quiet moments between gusts, she could still hear his voice echoing through the dark. Clara. The days grew longer in the stretch between spring and summer, and on the plains, that meant the sun didn't set so much as it bled out slowly across the sky, soaking the fields in a crimson hush. Clara leaned against the fence post, hands tucked into her back pockets, and watched the herd graze under the dying light. The wind was softer today, carrying with it the smell of wild sage and dust. It had been a week since she found Luke, though every day felt like a chapter in some half-forgotten book. He was healing faster than she expected. The bruises were still there, faint ghosts of impact beneath his skin, but the limp was gone, and the color had returned to his face. He'd started helping in the mornings, feeding the chickens, stacking hay, brushing Dusty with an instinctive gentleness that made Clara's heart twist. She hadn't asked for help. He just started doing it, like he belonged there, like he'd always known this place. And that was the part that unsettled her most. He didn't know who he was, but the way he moved around the ranch, the way he talked to the animals, fixed tools, saddled a horse, it was as if his hands remembered what his mind had forgotten. Clara caught herself staring more than she should have, watching the way he tied knots with muscle memory, how he held the reins with ease, how his lips curled into a smile when the barn cats curled around his boots. She knew those smiles. She'd memorized them. One morning, she came out to find him sitting on the porch steps with a piece of pine wood and her grandfather's old whittling knife. He didn't say a word, just sat in the quiet, shaving thin curls of wood into the grass. Clara watched from the doorway, arms crossed. The last person to sit there with that knife in hand had been Lucas, carving their initials into the swing post just before shipping out. Luke held the knife the same way. He was carving a horse, crude, unfinished, but familiar. She didn't say anything. Not then. Later, she found him standing in the tack room, staring at the saddles. "This one," he said, without looking at her, fingers trailing the worn leather. "It's mine, isn't it?" Clara hesitated. "It was Lucas's." He nodded. "Feels right. The fit. The balance. I didn't know his name until you said it just now." He turned to face her, his brow drawn. "I've seen this saddle in my dreams." She stepped inside, her boots crunching on the straw. "I have dreams too," she said, voice low. "Waking ones, where you walk through that door like nothing happened. Where I don't have to remember your name through a folded flag." He didn't speak, just watched her, eyes shadowed with something deep and unsettled. "Why do I feel like I know you, Clara?" he asked finally. She couldn't look at him. "Grief plays tricks. Or maybe something deeper's trying to surface," he said. He didn't push her further. But that night, as she lay awake in bed, she heard it again, the sound of that old whittling knife scraping rhythmically against wood from the porch below. And somewhere in the corner of her heart, something ached. By the end of the week, they had fallen into a rhythm neither of them acknowledged. Morning started with coffee and quiet, the kind that wasn't awkward but thick with thoughts unspoken. Luke handled the barn while Clara checked the fence lines. They shared lunch without ceremony. the way people do when their hands are always busy and hearts too full for small talk. He never asked about her husband again, and she never brought up the name he whispered in his sleep. But then came the evening when the wind shifted again. This time not with weather, but with memory. It was Clara's birthday. She didn't mention it, hadn't celebrated in 2 years. But Luke brought her a gift anyway, shy and uncertain, wrapped in a ragged bandana tied at the corners. She opened it at the table. Inside was a carved horse, finished now, smooth and sanded, delicate legs poised in motion. On the belly, scratched faintly into the wood, were 2 initials, CD. She stared at it, heart pounding. "You made this?" she asked. He nodded, watching her reaction. "Why those letters?" He frowned. "They came to me in a dream, over and over. I thought maybe it was your name, Clara Dalton." Her breath caught. He didn't know that. No one had told him her last name. She rose from the table, chair scraping behind her. He followed, confused. "Did I do something wrong?" "No," she said, backing away. "I just need air." He watched her retreat through the front door, the screen slamming behind her. She walked into the dark, past the porch steps, past the swing, until she stood under the wide yawn of stars and pressed her fingers to her lips. Lucas had carved that same horse once, years ago, when they first bought the ranch. It had broken in a move, lost somewhere between deployments. She never told anyone about it, never mentioned the initials. And now, here it was again, in Luke's hands. She turned to see him standing on the porch, barefoot, shadowed. "I didn't mean to upset you," he said. "You didn't," she whispered. "That's the problem." He stepped down slowly, carefully, like one would approach a wild thing that might spook. "There's something in me that's pulling toward you, Clara. I don't understand it, but it's there." She shook her head. "Don't say that unless you mean it." "I don't know what I mean anymore," he said. "But when I see you, something inside me settles." She stared at him, searching his face for a lie. "Do you remember music?" she asked suddenly. He blinked. "What kind?" She stepped back onto the porch and opened the screen door. Inside, she walked to the old record player and dug out a vinyl from the crate under the coffee table. She placed it gently on the turntable and dropped the needle. The song started low, a slow country waltz, sweet and aching. Lucas's favorite. Luke froze in the doorway. His fingers twitched. She turned, heart hammering. He stepped forward, eyes wide. "I know this." He reached out a hand. "May I?" Clara hesitated, then slipped her hand into his. They danced slowly in the center of the room, her head on his shoulder, his breath uneven against her neck. His hand found the small of her back like it always had. His footsteps were the same. And then, as the chorus hummed through the room, she felt him tremble. He pulled back slightly, eyes clouded. "There was a ring," he said, voice barely audible. "Silver. Your hands smelled like rosemary. There was a dance. This dance." She gripped his arm, tears stinging. "What else?" He closed his eyes. "A church. Laughter. Someone clapping. You wore blue." Her knees went weak. I think I married you," he said, and then he crumpled. She caught him before he hit the floor. He passed out cold, his body limp against hers, sweat beading on his brow. The record spun on. The room was silent, except for the soft, looping static of the song's end. Clara cradled his head and whispered his name. Both of them. "Lucas! Luke, please come back to me." But he didn't stir. The fire popped in the hearth. Outside, the wind picked up again, rustling the grass. Inside, 2 hearts beat wildly, one unconscious, the other unraveling. The silence in the house was heavier than a thundercloud. Clara sat at the edge of the bed, her hands trembling, wrapped around a cold compress that she gently pressed to Luke's forehead. He was still unconscious, his face pale and glistening, jaw slack, breaths shallow but steady. The room smelled like cedar, sweat, and something faintly metallic. Memory, maybe, rising like steam in the stillness. She hadn't moved much since she dragged him from the floor. Every second since that moment when he said, "I think I married you," had tunneled into her with a quiet fury. She had cradled him in her arms the way she used to when Lucas came back from night terrors after his first deployment. the same way she used to hold him when words weren't enough, when silence had to carry the weight. Now she sat here again, but this time as someone unsure whether she was holding a ghost, a miracle, or something cruelly caught between both. His eyes flickered once, then stilled. She exhaled and brushed a lock of damp hair from his temple. "Come back," she whispered. "Please." The wind howled against the window panes. A low rumble in the sky hinted at another storm, but Clara didn't move to prepare. Let it come. Let it flood the fields, tear down fences. She'd rebuild it all again, brick by brick, as long as he woke up. By morning, his color had returned, though his eyes remained closed. She made coffee, poured it into the red enamel mug he'd claimed as his own, and set it on the nightstand. The smell wafted across the room, rich and familiar, curling into every corner of the house like hope. When he finally stirred, it was slow. His brow furrowed as if waking from a long and bitter dream. His eyes opened, unfocused, but gradually found hers. "You fainted," she said softly. "Scared the hell out of me." He blinked slowly. "Did I say something?" She hesitated. "Yeah, you did." "What? What did I say?" "You said you thought you married me." His face tightened, and a hand drifted to his temple. "I remember. The song. Then dancing. Then flashes. A ring. A ceremony. But it was all fog again after that." Clara looked away, jaw clenched. "I don't know what to believe anymore." He sat up with effort, his muscles trembling with exhaustion. "Clara, I swear I'm not trying to hurt you. These things come and go, like a dam breaking for a second and then sealing up again." "I believe you," she said, barely a whisper. "But it's breaking me." He looked at her, really looked. And for a moment the man in that stare was her husband. The weight in his gaze, the slight tilt of his head, the way his hand twitched toward hers before stopping, it was Lucas, right there on the surface. And then it was gone again, like smoke in wind. That afternoon, a truck pulled into the driveway. Clara recognized it immediately. Government plates, army decals, the same as the ones that had delivered the worst day of her life. Her stomach dropped. Luke moved toward the door instinctively, and she caught his arm. "Let me," she said. He nodded. A tall, dark-skinned man in uniform stepped out, a file in hand, sunglasses shielding his eyes from the sun's glare. His movements were efficient, his posture stiff. Clara's boots hit the gravel with a crunch as she walked out to meet him. "Ma'am," the man said. "Sergeant Miguel Marquez. I'm with Military Personnel Recovery. I'm looking for a man reported found near these parts, possibly injured. Local doc said you might know something." Clara's jaw set. "We have someone staying here. Found him unconscious by the creek. No ID. Head wound. Doesn't remember much." Marquez tilted his head, studying her face, then glanced past her toward the porch where Luke had stepped out. The moment their eyes met, the sergeant froze. "Son of a bitch," he breathed. Clara turned to see Luke standing barefoot on the top step, arms crossed loosely, face unreadable. "Sergeant?" she asked. Marquez stepped forward, slowly. "That's him. That's Lucas Dalton." Luke blinked, his fingers curling. Clara couldn't speak. Marquez looked between them, then back at Luke. "You don't recognize me, do you?" Luke shook his head slowly. "I don't remember you. Or me. Just flashes." "I served with you," Marquez said, voice thickening. "Last mission was a blackout op. We thought you were KIA after the explosion near Falah. Your name's on a memorial wall." Clara's breath hitched. "You're sure?" Marquez gave her a look so serious it could level mountains. "Ma'am, I carried your husband's photo in my pocket for 6 months while we searched bodies." Luke sat down hard on the step. Clara didn't move. "I'm not dead?" he whispered, more to himself than anyone. "No," Marquez said. "But something happened. And you went missing long enough for command to give up." Luke looked up, dazed. "What was I doing out there?" Why don't I remember? Marquez crouched beside him. Could have been the blast. Concussion. Maybe even trauma. The brain does what it has to protect itself. Clara wrapped her arms around her chest. I loved her, Luke said suddenly, looking at her. I know that much. It wasn't a dream. Marquez looked between them, his voice quieter now. I can get you to a VA hospital. Neurological team. Might help restore more. You'll need records, ID. Hell, you're gonna need a whole new life built from the ground up. Clara's throat closed. Can't he stay here? Marquez looked at her and for the first time softened. That's up to you. But he's still officially listed as dead. You'll need to fix that. Together. He left not long after, giving Clara a folder with the recovered details, partial mission reports, a photo of Lucas from 2 years ago, and a copy of the death certificate she had signed. Luke turned it over in his hands. You buried me, he said. She couldn't look at him. I lit a candle every Sunday. I kept your boots by the door until they crumbled. I talked to you in my sleep. He reached for her hand. She didn't pull away. I may not remember everything yet, he said, but I know that loving you is the only thing that feels true. She swallowed, her voice shaking. But I'm not sure who you are now. I am trying to be him, he said, but I need your help. She looked at him, eyes full of storms. Then prove it. He nodded, standing tall again. Where do I start? They spent that evening going through boxes of photos. Lucas stared at each one, as if trying to force the images to burn into his brain. He lingered over their wedding picture, his younger self grinning under a pale blue sky. He touched it gently, then set it aside. I remember that sky, he said. It rained right after. It did, Clara whispered. And you danced with me barefoot in the mud. He chuckled, eyes glassy. God, I was in love with you. You still are, she said. Or you wouldn't be here. That night, another storm rolled in. Wind slammed the shutters. Clara got up to check the barn. Luke insisted on going with her. They stepped into the dark together, flashlights cutting through the rain. Lightning cracked above as they reached the south side of the barn, and then the smell hit her. Smoke. Fire, she shouted. The north loft was already glowing orange, flames licking through the hay. She rushed in, instinct overtaking fear. Clara, he called after her, but she was already pulling open the stall doors, shooing horses out into the yard. Then the beam snapped. She heard the crack above her before she saw it. Lucas tackled her from behind, slamming her to the ground as the beam crashed inches from her skull. The heat was unbearable. Smoke choked the air. Clara, move, he shouted, dragging her toward the open door. She couldn't breathe. He coughed, stumbled, pulled her out with strength that came from something deeper than instinct. Outside, the wind caught them, cool and clean. He dropped to his knees, pulling her close, her head cradled in his hands. I remember, he whispered, voice raw. I remember you. She looked up through tears. Tell me. Our wedding. The swing. The night I told you I'd come home, even if it killed me. Her sob turned to a laugh. You did, Lucas, she said. You came home. And in the ashes of the barn behind them, they held each other, not as strangers anymore, but as two pieces finally made whole again. Smoke still clung to the walls of the barn days after the fire had been put out, a bitter memory etched into scorched beams and blackened hay. The northern loft was gone, collapsed in on itself like a house of cards, but the rest of the structure stood stubbornly in place, as if refusing to surrender to the flames. Clara walked the edge of the damage in the pale morning light, a mug of coffee in her hands, her boots crunching over ash and cracked wood. Lucas was just ahead, sleeves rolled up, hair damp from a quick rinse at the outdoor pump, a toolbox resting at his feet. He didn't ask permission to help. He didn't wait to be told. Ever since the fire, and the memory flood that followed it, he worked like a man trying to stitch himself back into a life that had nearly forgotten him. Clara watched him from behind for a moment, her heart catching in her throat. The way he crouched to inspect the burned flooring, the careful attention to each nail and board, it was him, not just the shell of him, not just the instincts or muscle memory. It was Lucas. Whole. Awake. Home. He looked over his shoulder and caught her watching. A slow smile spread across his face, warm and knowing. "You make that coffee just to tempt me out here, or are you gonna share?" She walked over and handed him the mug without a word. He took it, their fingers brushing, and for a second it was like time folded in on itself. "This place got lucky," he said after a sip. "Could have lost the whole barn." She nodded. "We've lost enough." He stood, set the mug on the beam beside them, and gently cupped her cheek. "But we're still here." She leaned into his hand, eyes closing. The touch was familiar. So painfully familiar. "I don't know how to do this," she said quietly. "Do what?" "Start again. From the middle of something that never got an ending." He kissed her forehead. "Then let's not start over. Let's keep going from here." The days that followed were steady. Quiet. Healing. Lucas didn't talk about everything that came back to him, not all at once, but pieces of his past returned in fragments. First his mother's name, then a dog he'd had as a boy, then the exact coordinates of a desert base where he'd been stationed. Clara listened, always, letting him tell the story as it came to him. Sometimes he forgot things, where he put the hammer, or the name of a neighbor who stopped by to offer supplies. But Clara never scolded him. She just touched his hand and said, "It's all right, you're here." And he was. Not just in the physical sense, not just in the boots and sweat and the laugh that still rumbled deep in his chest, but in presence. He was here. When he held her hand, it felt like a heartbeat coming home. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the world in soft orange, Lucas came up behind her on the porch and wrapped his arms around her waist. She leaned back into him, eyes closing. "I want to marry you again," he said. Clara turned, her breath catching. "We're already married," she whispered. "I don't mean legally," he said. "I mean here, now, as the man I am and the woman you are, not who we were." She studied him, the firelight of the sky catching in his eyes. "You really mean that? I'd marry you every year if you let me. Every time you looked at me like you did the first day we met. Every time you brought me back to life." She blinked fast, and he reached into his back pocket, pulling out a small wooden box. He'd carved it himself, smooth and simple, with the letters L+C burned into the lid. Inside was a silver band, worn, familiar. "My ring," she breathed. "I found it in the drawer with your letters," he said. "It still fits." She laughed through her tears. "Of course it does." He knelt there, in the fading light, not needing words anymore. She dropped to her knees with him, and they held each other in the silence, wrapped in something deeper than promises. 2 weeks later, they stood in the pasture behind the barn. What was left of it rebuilt just enough to stand proud again, under the wide, eternal sky. It was just the two of them. Clara wore the same dress she'd worn to their first wedding, altered at the seams by her own hands. Lucas wore a simple button-down, sleeves rolled to his elbows, the scar on his arm catching the sun like a badge. They exchanged vows again, not written, not rehearsed, just spoken, raw and real. "I promise to remember what matters," he said, voice steady, "and to relearn what I've lost, with you. Every day." "I promise to hold on to what's true," she replied, "even when the world tries to take it from me, and to never let go of you again." They sealed it with a kiss that felt like breath after drowning, like light after too much dark. And then they danced. On the porch that night, with music playing low and stars blinking into life above them, Clara rested her head on Lucas's chest, his arms wrapped around her like armor. "You know," she said, "you hum in your sleep again." He chuckled, chin resting on her hair. "It's the only tune I never forgot." They stood there a long while, the porch creaking gently beneath them, the soft rustle of the grass carrying memories and dreams alike. In the months that followed, Lucas began working with a local veterans support group, sharing his story in pieces, never more than he could manage. He never claimed to be whole, only healing. And Clara reopened the south pasture, building a space for equine therapy, something they'd once spoken of during one long night before he deployed. People came, broken people, grieving people, and found something solid here, something that didn't demand they forget their pain, only that they carry it with open hands. And through it all, the two of them kept dancing, on porch nights, in the barn, in the field beneath the sky. Sometimes she'd catch him looking at her with a kind of wonder, like he was still remembering what it meant to be alive. And every time, she'd reach out, pull him close, and remind him he didn't have to do it alone anymore. They never said the fire was what saved them, or the dreams, or even fate. They just knew that sometimes love doesn't ask permission. It survives, it waits, and when it's ready, it comes home. In the heart of the Wyoming plains, love didn't just return, it remembered. Through fire, loss, and silence, two souls found each other again, not by chance, but by a bond that time and memory could never truly erase. Because sometimes, even when the past is lost, the heart still knows its way home. If stories like Clara and Lucas's moved your heart, don't write off just yet. Subscribe to Wild West Love Chronicles and saddle up for more unforgettable tales of love, resilience, and second chances under the wide open sky. New stories every week, where the West isn't just wild, it's full of heart.